The evening was draped in a tranquility I hadn't felt in a while. Rain lashed against the expansive windows of our cozy den, creating a rhythmic symphony that was a welcome change from the usual cacophony. The space, typically a whirlwind of activity and noise, was unusually still. Bethany, my younger cousin, was out late again. Another work meeting with colleagues. Her teenage daughter, Lila, was at a sleepover. Lost in the whirlwind of adolescence, it was just me and Jasper, our mischievous black and white feline companion, reigning over this rare island of quiet. Jasper, perched atop the coffee table like a furry king surveying his domain, lazily flicked his tail, his half-closed eyes fixed on me with an air of amusement. It was as if he was saying, "Relax, human, I've got everything under control." I couldn't help but chuckle at his regal posture, a reminder of how even in the calmest moments, our pets can inject a dose of vibrancy. This unexpected peace offered a chance to unwind. After clearing the remnants of dinner, a comforting thought took root: a long, luxurious bath. The image of warm water embracing me, steam swirling around the room, was enough to melt away the day's unseen tensions. True to form, Jasper shadowed me to the bathroom, his paws padding silently against the hardwood floor. He stationed himself by the door, a furry sentinel on duty. His inquisitive green eyes followed my every move as I filled the tub, the porcelain gleaming under the bathroom lights. And with a soft click, I turned the lock. His gaze seemed to question my actions. Why the secrecy? It's just us here. But he settled down with a soft chirp, a feline seal of approval. Moments later, he stretched languidly, sauntered back towards the den, leaving me to the rising steam and the promise of relaxation. A smile touched my lips as I sank into the water, grateful for this stolen moment of peace. My thoughts drifting aimlessly like the raindrops streaming down the window pane. The steam rising from the bathwater enveloped me like a warm embrace, chasing away the chill of the day and easing the tension in my shoulders. The scent of lavender, released from the bath salts and the flickering candles perched on the edge of the tub, filled the air, creating a sanctuary of peace. Outside, the rain fell in a steady rhythm against the window pane, a soothing lullaby to my troubled mind. I closed my eyes, sinking deeper into the water, letting the day's worries drift away. Suddenly, a sound pierced the tranquility, a soft creak, like a footstep on the old wooden floorboards just outside the bathroom door. My eyes flew open, my heart pounding against my ribs. The house was old, with a tendency to groan and settle, especially on rainy nights like this. "It's probably just Jasper," I murmured to myself, picturing my curious cat exploring the shadowy hallways. I tried to relax again, to recapture the sense of calm that had been so abruptly shattered. But just as my muscles began to unclench, another sound reached me, the distinct sound of someone moving slowly and deliberately towards the bathroom. A shiver ran down my spine, and the warmth of the bath no longer felt comforting. "Don't be silly," I chided myself. "It's just the old house settling." But even as I tried to reason with my fear, my eyes were glued to the sliver of light beneath the bathroom door. For a moment, it remained undisturbed. Then a shadow flickered across it, pausing briefly before disappearing. My breath caught in my throat. I sat bolt upright in the tub, my heart hammering against my chest. I could hear it now, soft, rhythmic breathing, just on the other side of the door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound brave. Silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that stretched on for an eternity. Doubts crept in. Had I imagined it? Was I just being paranoid? But just as I was about to dismiss my fears, a familiar voice broke the tension. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, it's just us," Lila said, her voice filled with remorse. Bethany appeared beside her, her face etched with concern. "We didn't mean to scare you. she added. "We were looking for something in the hallway closet and didn't realize you were in here." Relief washed over me, so intense it was almost dizzying. I sank back into the water, my body trembling with the lingering effects of adrenaline. "You two nearly gave me a heart attack," I managed to say, forcing a laugh. The rain continued its steady drumbeat against the window, a comforting counterpoint to the turmoil that had just subsided. As I lay there, the warmth of the water slowly calming my nerves, I couldn't help but marvel at how quickly peace could turn to fear, and how easily that fear could be dispelled by the familiar voices of friends. The bathroom door creaked open, and I froze. "I didn't realize you were in there," a voice mumbled from the hallway. It was Caleb, but his tone was strained, laced with an unfamiliar awkwardness that sent a shiver down my spine. "It's fine, Caleb," I replied, trying to keep my voice light despite the sudden unease that washed over me. "I'll be out in a minute." His footsteps retreated down the hallway, leaving me alone in the silence. But the quiet felt different now, heavy with a tension I couldn't explain. A strange feeling lingered, a sense of something being off, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Stepping out of the bathroom, I was met by Jasper, my Siamese cat. His piercing green eyes seemed to bore into me, as if he sensed the shift in the atmosphere. I knelt down, burying my fingers in his soft fur, seeking comfort in his familiar presence. Yet, the unsettling feeling persisted, a nagging doubt that refused to be ignored. The next morning, a chill permeated the house. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I awoke to the gentle tap of Jasper's paws on the hardwood floor as he padded around the bed. The memory of the previous night's strange encounter returned, a dark cloud hanging over my thoughts. Determined to shake off the feeling, I went through my usual morning routine, hoping the normalcy would ease my mind. Downstairs, Caleb sat at the kitchen table, a steaming mug clutched in his hand. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped, a stark contrast to his usual morning energy. He stared into his coffee, the pungent aroma of burnt coffee beans filling the air. "Good morning," I chirped, attempting a cheerful tone. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice flat and distant, his eyes still fixed on his mug. Jasper, curled up in his favorite armchair, watched us with an intensity that mirrored my own growing concern. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the warmth of the mug failing to dispel the coldness that had settled over the room. As I sat across from Caleb, Jasper leaped onto my lap, his soft weight a comforting presence against my legs. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I searched for something to say, anything to break the tension, but the words caught in my throat. "Did you get back late last night?" I finally asked, striving for a casual tone. He hesitated, then finally met my gaze. "Yeah, pretty late," he admitted. His eyes filled with a flicker of guilt, his shoulders tense. I chose not to press further, letting his vague answer hang in the air. The unease was palpable now, a thick fog that seemed to separate us. Jasper's purring filled the silence, a small beacon of warmth in the growing chill. But even his comforting presence couldn't fully dispel the anxiety that gripped me. Suddenly, Caleb pushed his chair back and stood up, his movements abrupt. "I need to work on a project for school," he mumbled, his voice strained, before turning and fleeing the room. His footsteps echoed through the silent house, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts and a growing sense of dread. Jasper stretched languidly on my lap, his emerald eyes gazing up at me with a questioning tilt of his head. I had no answers for him, only a growing list of questions that gnawed at my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. The house felt strangely empty when Caleb disappeared into the study, Jasper padding softly behind him. My heart ached with a growing unease as I watched them go, the tension from the previous night, thick and suffocating, clung to me like a shroud. What had shifted between us? Why was Caleb acting so distant, so unlike himself? The hours that followed were agonizingly slow. I tried to lose myself in the mundane, the clatter of dishes, the hum of the vacuum cleaner, the rustle of pages turning, but nothing could distract me from the heavy silence that had fallen over our home. Caleb, usually so full of life and conversation, remained shut away in his study. His absence was a physical presence, a constant reminder of the invisible wall that seemed to have risen between us. As dusk began to settle, I found myself drawn to the kitchen. Cooking always brought me a sense of peace, a way to nurture and comfort. Perhaps, I thought, the simple act of preparing a meal could help mend the rift that had formed between us. With a heavy heart, I began chopping vegetables. The rhythmic thud of the knife against the cutting board, a small solace in the turmoil of my emotions. Suddenly, Jasper leaped onto the kitchen table, his emerald eyes fixed on the doorway. He sat there, poised and expectant, as if sensing someone's approach. A moment later, Caleb appeared. His shoulders slumped, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He offered a weak smile that failed to reach his eyes, hesitating at the threshold as if unsure whether to enter. "Something smells amazing," he said, his voice a low rumble that did little to dispel the tension. I turned from the counter, a hopeful smile gracing my lips. "I thought we could have dinner together," I offered, desperate to recapture the intimacy we had shared. Maybe, just maybe, a shared meal could help us find our way back to each other? Jasper jumped down from the table and rubbed against Caleb's legs, a soft purr rumbling from deep within his chest. Caleb looked down at the cat, a genuine smile flickering across his face before his eyes met mine. For a fleeting second, I saw a glimmer of something in his gaze, relief, perhaps, or maybe even longing, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Yeah," he replied quietly, finally stepping into the kitchen. "Dinner sounds good." Relief washed over me as I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Turning back to the counter, I resumed chopping the vegetables, a flicker of hope igniting within me. Perhaps this was the first step towards healing the wounds that had silently appeared between us. He settled into the chair across the table, each movement deliberate, almost hesitant, as if testing the fragile atmosphere of the room. Caleb's eyes followed me as I finished preparing dinner, his gaze flickering to the worn floorboards and the dancing candlelight on the countertop, a silent observer in his own home. The aroma of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air as I placed the plates on the table. We ate, the clinking of silverware against porcelain echoing in the quiet. At first, our conversation was strained, filled with the mundane details of our day, Bethany's upcoming school trip, a challenging project at work, the latest news headlines. But slowly, like a tentative stream finding its course, the words began to flow more easily. The tension that had gripped us since it happened, seemed to ease with each shared laugh and casual remark. As I cleared the table, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Perhaps, just perhaps, we were finding our way back to some semblance of normalcy. But as I turned from the sink, Caleb was suddenly there, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. My breath hitched in my throat. His presence was overwhelming, filling my senses. "Mara," he began, his voice barely a whisper, laced with uncertainty. He seemed to struggle for the next words, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. I turned to face him fully, my heart pounding against my ribs. The world narrowed to the space between us, the air thick with unspoken emotions. He leaned in, slowly, tentatively, as if asking permission without words. His eyes held mine, and for a fleeting moment, time seemed to stop. Heat crept up my neck, and I instinctively took a step back, my mind reeling. "I'm sorry," Caleb blurted out, his voice rushed, his face flushed with embarrassment. He retreated a step, his expression a confusing mix of regret and longing. Then, without another word, he turned and fled up the stairs. I stood there, the plate still clutched in my hand, my pulse racing. My mind replayed the moment, dissecting every nuance, every flicker of emotion in his eyes. Jasper, our ginger cat, appeared in the doorway. His emerald eyes narrowed, his tail twitching with what I could only interpret as feline disapproval. It was as if even he sensed the shift in the air, the unspoken words hanging between Caleb and me. The rest of the evening was a blur. The house felt heavy with silence once more. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to decipher the meaning of Caleb's sudden advance. I sat in my room, a book open on my lap, the words swimming before my eyes. Why had he come so close? What did it mean? I tried to dismiss it as an awkward moment, a lapse in judgment, but the intensity in his eyes, the hesitation in his touch, spoke of something more profound, something that had irrevocably changed the dynamic between us. Jasper leaped onto my lap, his soft purrs a comforting counterpoint to the turmoil within me. I stroked his fur absently, but even his presence couldn't quell the unease that had taken root in my heart. Something had shifted between Caleb and me, something I didn't understand, and the uncertainty of it all filled me with a sense of foreboding. Just as I was about to succumb to the spiral of my thoughts, a noise from beyond my door snapped me back to the present. Jasper suddenly leapt down from my lap, his paws tapping softly against the floor as he trotted toward the door. I blinked, startled by his sudden movement. Before I could react, the door creaked open slowly, and Caleb appeared in the doorway. His expression was serious, but tinged with hesitation, as though he were weighing whether or not to step inside. "Can we talk?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, gently closing the book I hadn't been reading and setting it aside. Jasper, ever the vigilant observer, hopped back onto the bed, curling up as though determined to remain a part of whatever was about to unfold. His tail swished back and forth slowly, almost as if he were monitoring the room's energy. Caleb stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. He hesitated, standing just a few steps away from me. His eyes wandered across the room, but they kept flicking back to meet mine, as though he were searching for the courage to speak. "I wanted to apologize for earlier," he began, his voice subdued, tinged with remorse. "I didn't mean for it to come across as strange." I offered a small smile, trying to ease the tension. "It's okay, Caleb," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Sometimes things get misunderstood. It's no big deal." But despite my reassurance, the weight in his expression didn't lift. He moved toward the edge of the bed, lowering himself slowly onto it. His shoulders slumped, his posture heavy with unspoken emotions. He paused, his voice faltering before continuing. "I just feel like, since I came back here, everything's different. Like, I don't know where I fit anymore." His words caught me off guard, striking a chord of empathy I hadn't expected. I'd never considered how complex things must feel for him at this stage in his life. Growing up, trying to navigate emotions, and living in a house where every action seemed to be scrutinized or compared. "I understand," I said softly, my voice carrying an undertone of sympathy. "It's not easy, Caleb, but sometimes these moments of uncertainty are just that. Moments. You'll find your way, in your own time." He looked up at me, his dark eyes shimmering with a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. The air between us felt charged, thick with unspoken words. Slowly, As though afraid to disrupt the delicate balance in the room, he inched closer. "You're always so kind to me," he murmured, his voice raw with sincerity. The vulnerability in his tone was disarming, and I could see the internal battle he was waging, searching for the right words, the right actions. The silence between us stretched, heavy and almost tangible. Then, before I could react or fully comprehend the shift, Caleb leaned in closer. The warmth of his breath brushed against my skin, and in an instant that felt both fleeting and eternal. His lips grazed my cheek, feather-light and hesitant, like a question waiting for an answer. It was never my intention to blur the lines. Caleb's touch, a simple gesture of gratitude, a silent way of expressing emotions he struggled to put into words. But even in its fleeting nature, the moment set my heart pounding. I leaned back slowly, hoping to convey warmth and understanding in my gesture as our eyes met. "Caleb," I began softly, my voice steady yet gentle. "Let's just be ourselves. Sometimes, that's all we need." He hesitated, his eyes searching my face, weighing my words. Then, a slow nod, his expression softening. He rose, hands brushing against his sides with a nervous energy. His gaze flickered towards Jasper, curled on the bed, observing the scene with an almost eerie awareness. "Thank you, Mara," he murmured, sincerity lacing his voice, before turning to leave. The click of the door closing behind him brought a sense of release, the tension that had filled the room beginning to ease. Jasper purred softly, settling back into his spot, as if confirming that equilibrium had been restored. Yet, I knew this night had left an indelible mark, a subtle shift, a thread woven into the tapestry of our lives, impossible to undo. Dawn broke with an unexpected tranquility. I woke earlier than usual, lingering in bed, bathed in the warm, dappled sunlight filtering through the curtains. Jasper lay beside me, his sleek body rising and falling with each peaceful breath. In the stillness, a confusing mix of emotions stirred within me: anxiety, relief, regret. The events of the past few days remained vivid, and I couldn't deny the intentionality behind Caleb's words and actions. But what was I to do with this knowledge? That was a question I couldn't yet answer. Finally venturing into the kitchen, I found Caleb already there, standing by the sink, his gaze lost in the distance. He seemed oblivious to my presence until I gently cleared my throat. "Good morning," I greeted, striving for a light, casual tone. He turned, his eyes cautious yet composed. "Morning," he replied, the word drawn out, heavy with unspoken emotion. A palpable tension hung in the air, not a harsh tension, but a thoughtful pause, as if we were both carefully navigating the next move. "Coffee," I offered, moving towards the coffee maker, hoping to bridge the distance between us, to recapture the effortless normalcy that had been absent these past few days. "Yeah, thanks," he accepted, taking a seat at the table. We sat facing each other, exchanging trivial comments about the weather, our plans for the day. Yet, beneath the surface, unspoken truths simmered. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. He drew a deep breath, his gaze meeting mine, steady and filled with unspoken emotion. "Mara, I want you to know," he began, his voice thick with emotion. He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "Last night, it wasn't just gratitude I was feeling." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His touch sent a shiver down my spine, a mix of fear and anticipation. "I've been fighting it," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "But I can't deny it any longer. He paused again, his eyes searching mine for any sign of rejection. but all I could feel was the echo of his touch, the warmth of his hand on mine, and the undeniable truth that I felt it too. "I appreciate everything, Mara," Caleb began, his voice earnest, yet laced with a noticeable strain. "For always being there, for understanding me, even when I can't seem to understand myself." His words resonated deeply within me. At his age, emotions can be a tempest, a whirlwind of confusion that makes expressing oneself feel like an insurmountable task. I offered him a warm smile, my heart swelling with a sense of renewed connection. I could feel the invisible threads of our bond weaving themselves back together. "Caleb," I said softly, my eyes locking with his, "more than anything, I want you to be happy. Life can be challenging, throwing curveballs when we least expect them, but we'll face them together. I promise." His intense gaze softened as he met my eyes, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before he glanced away. He fidgeted with his coffee cup, his fingers tracing absent patterns on the rim, as if searching for the right words to express the thoughts swirling within him. For a fleeting moment, I held my breath, anticipating him to speak. But instead, he abruptly pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. "I think I need some air," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, understanding his need for solitude. A wave of exhaustion washed over me as I watched him disappear through the kitchen door. The silence returned, heavy and palpable, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. As dusk settled, the house was once again enveloped in a blanket of quiet. Bethany was still at work, her usual cheerful presence absent. Caleb had gone out with friends, sending a quick text to say he might be late. I curled up on the living room sofa, a soft throw draped over my shoulders and a steaming mug of tea warming my hands. Jasper, our ginger tabby, lay curled up beside me, his amber green eyes fixed on me with an almost unnerving intensity, as if he could sense the turmoil within me. I attempted to lose myself in a book, but the words seemed to blur and dance before my eyes. My mind kept replaying the morning's conversation. Caleb, too, had felt the subtle shift in our relationship, the unspoken tension hanging in the air. But like me, he seemed unsure how to navigate these uncharted waters. With a sigh, I set the book aside and turned my gaze towards the window. The rain had finally ceased, leaving behind an almost eerie stillness. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, mirroring the quiet anticipation within me. I allowed myself to be consumed by the tranquility, the silence broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Suddenly, the sharp click of the front door startled me. Caleb was back. His footsteps were unusually soft, almost hesitant, as if he were trying not to shatter the fragile peace that had settled over the house. "You're home early," I remarked, glancing towards the doorway as he entered. "Yeah, changed my mind," he replied, his voice subdued. He walked over to the armchair opposite me and sank into it, his gaze fixed on the floor. Lost in thought. An uncomfortable silence descended upon us, the air thick with unspoken words. It was as if we were both walking on eggshells, terrified that a single misspoken word could shatter the delicate truce we had unknowingly forged. Finally, Caleb lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine. The gratitude I had heard in his voice earlier that morning was still present, but now it was mingled with a newfound resolve. "Mara," he began, his voice low and steady, "I know things have been strange lately. It's like we're both trying to figure out where we stand. But I want you to know, you mean a lot to me." His words, though simple, struck a chord deep within me. A genuine smile touched my lips as I replied, "Thank you, Caleb. That means more to me than you know." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his brow furrowed in thought. We'll figure this out, won't we? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, I affirmed, my voice unwavering. We will. In that moment, the invisible barrier that had seemed to separate us dissolved, replaced by a sense of shared understanding. Jasper, our furry peacemaker, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, leaped onto Caleb's lap. A soft smile spread across Caleb's face as he stroked the cat's fur, eliciting a contented purr. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the silence between us was not laden with anxiety or unanswered questions. It was simply comforting. And for the first time in a long time, a wave of hope washed over me. Maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective.